In our last video, we took a deep dive into understanding the core psychology and childhood origins behind the insidious poor me mentality. How painful experiences of neglect, abuse, and inconsistent parenting can breed this all-consuming belief of being fundamentally unlovable and unworthy of care. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on other specific toxic patterns the poor me mindset creates in adult relationships, the utterly destabilizing and heart-rending dynamics they inflict on the loved ones who choose to stay and love them despite the maladaptive coping mechanisms. So let's get started with another hallmark of the poor me mentality, which is the inability or unwillingness to truly see and appreciate the loving efforts of their partner. Like a person dying of thirst yet refusing to drink, they are willfully blind to the nurturing acts happening all around them. Very early on, the poor me takes their partner's devotion for granted. The daily little gestures, kind words, thoughtful surprises get immediately dismissed or minimized and then simply not seen at all. Since they fail to register the love they are receiving, the poor me paradoxically views themselves as being perpetually underappreciated and underserved by their partner. Their insatiable lack mentality means the bar of expectations is never met, no matter how much effort is made. This creates a dynamic where the poor me becomes increasingly demanding, critical, and anger-prone when their excessive and ever-escalating needs are not fulfilled to their satisfactory level, despite their partner already going above and beyond in ways the poor me stubbornly refuses to recognize. Meanwhile, the loved one is stuck in a maddening catch-22. They are already depleting themselves trying to make the poor me feel cared for and seen. But like a black hole, no amount of attentiveness or acts of service ever satiate the poor me's gaping void of self-rejection and unmet childhood needs. So the non-poor me partner finds themselves completely spent, their resources utterly drained as they futilely try to comply with increasing demands and reassure their perpetually dissatisfied partner to no avail. Resentment builds, self-esteem plummets, all while the poor me remains committed to the delusion of being constantly underappreciated by their endlessly giving loved one. It's a tragic paradox of the poor me's making, being showered with devotion, yet willfully starving themselves of feeling truly loved and cherished. This warped way of relating is hugely taxing on partners who eventually may reach a breaking point of realizing their efforts will forever be unappreciated and insufficient for their poor me loved one. The jealousy and paranoia that often plague the poor me mindset is another tragically self-sabotaging aspect. Here's how that insidious dynamic commonly plays out. When the poor me's excessive and increasingly irrational demands inevitably go unfulfilled by their drained partner, they very rarely look inward with self-awareness. Instead, their distrustful nature causes them to externalize the blame and conjure narratives of betrayal. When their emotional needs feel unmet despite their partner's devoted efforts, the poor me's fear of abandonment kicks into overdrive. Their insecurities most easily explain this perceived void by convincing themselves of infidelity, either emotional or physical. You must be getting your needs met by someone else behind my back. That's the only explanation for why I still feel so starved for affection, or for why I feel you are starting to disengage. This delusional leap in logic is rooted in the poor me's antagonistic perspective that constantly seeks potential threats to confirm their martyr identity. If their partner doesn't comply with an unreasonable request or has withdrawn due to sheer exhaustion, the poor me translates it as passionate affair rather than burnout. From there, extreme jealousy and baseless accusations of cheating can become incessant. The poor me will obsessively interpret every text, phone call, time away from them as evidence of betrayal. This unrelenting, unfounded jealousy is, of course, immensely toxic and emotionally abusive. It whittles away at any remaining self-esteem and independence for the falsely accused partner just trying to appease an emotional terrorist. The harder the poor me's loved one denies any cheating and pleads their fidelity, the more distrustful and convinced of deception the poor me becomes. Their core wounds and trauma blinds them from logic and personal accountability. In this warped Jekyll and Hyde existence, the poor me flits between love bombing with crippling neediness to rageful interrogations over fabricated infidelities. any remnants of emotional safety and basic intimacy erodes as the toxicity engulfs the relationship. However, the poor me is just as capable of getting into the very infidelity they baselessly accuse their partner of. Periods of relative relationship calm, or when their loved one understandably becomes emotionally withdrawn from the tumult, can trigger self-sabotage through unfaithful acting out. When positive bonding dynamics or their partner's presence feel too good for the poor me's psyche steeped in shame and wounds, cheating can manifest as a form of self-punishment. A reflexive way to confirm their toxic self-image by willingly destroying the contentment they simultaneously crave yet feel undeserving of. Or the poor me may stray engaging in adulterous acts when their partner's emotional resources become too depleted from enduring the relationship chaos, a dynamic the poor me unconsciously precipitates. This allows them to then play victims of abandonment, while conveniently obscuring how their own behavior catalyzed the very disconnect driving their infidelity. Their infidelity acts as a self-sabotaging emotional expulsion, giving the poor me unconscious permission to then rage at their partner with projections of being cheated on themselves. It's a sinister flip script allowing them to reclaim the victim narratives they depend on, even if they must knowingly manifest the betrayal to solidify those grievances. It's one of the most tragically ruinous outgrowths of the poor me psyche, being so consumed by abandonment fears that they treat moments of stability and care as existential threats requiring self-implosion, an attachment insecurity chain reaction contaminating relating at its core. In addition to the potential for self-sabotaging infidelity, the poor me also frequently portrays themselves as the eternal savior and giver within the relationship dynamic. However, this false generosity is merely another way to wickedly keep their partner hooked and engaged in an imbalanced, dysfunctional bond. The poor me will make grandiose shows of being financially, emotionally, or practically supportive to their loved one during times of vulnerability or need. Whether helping them get through academic stresses, lending large sums of money, or being an outward cheerleader for their ambitions, no request for assistance ever seems too elaborate. Yet this generosity always comes with enmeshed strings and debts attached that the partner can never quite repay in full. The poor me profusely overgives not out of true care, but as an unconscious method of creating a skewed power dynamic where their partner owes them indefinitely. "After everything I've done for you, how could you even think about leaving me?" becomes the guilt-tripping refrain anytime the indebted partner establishes boundaries or holds the poor me accountable for mistreatment. Their partner's legitimate grievances get distorted as gross ingratitude. The partner is groomed to feel so obligated for the poor me's exaggerated giving that they learn to tolerate the abuse and devaluations as justifiable payment. It becomes easier to make oneself small and acquiesce to toxic dynamics than to be constantly painted as selfish or ungrateful despite the generous inequities. This savior-giver posturing is really about creating a one-way dimension of control. The poor me can always leverage their empty shows of sacrificial care as justification to extract unreasonable deference from their partner. An inescapable "you owe me" bind that further entrenches intimacy avoidance behind a mask of false heroism and selflessness. Unless this malicious generosity and its power imbalances are accurately named, partners can remain indefinitely caught in the poor me's psychologically manipulative debt traps, temporarily alleviating discomfort with imbalanced giving that only deepens the long-term enmeshment and toxicity they actually crave. In addition to the overt grandstanding of generosity, the poor me also cultivates a facade of extreme self-reliance where they never outwardly need or ask for anything from their partner. Whether it's simple favors like picking up groceries, handling chores and errands, or bigger needs like career assistance or emotional support during crises. But this performative self-sufficiency is a masterful deflection. The poor me does deeply crave help and caretaking. They are just terrified of the vulnerability and intimacy that comes with being able to directly receive it in a reciprocal fashion. "No, I'm fine, I don't need any help with that," becomes the reflexive brush-off anytime their loved one notices gaps where assistance could be welcomed. But don't be fooled. the poor me doesn't actually deprive themselves. They simply won't admit to the need or accept the help being overtly offered. For instance, if their partner asks if they should pick up a pizza for dinner for them too, the poor me will dismiss it with, "No, I'm not hungry," only to then happily eat half of their partner's pizza once it arrives, acting as if nothing is amiss. Because for the poor me, being forced to acknowledge their faults, limitations, and dependencies is more terrifying than this covert, roundabout way of getting their needs met without the vulnerability of asking directly. Outright admitting they'd like a pizza too would require a level of openness their disordered thinking cannot tolerate. It's a self-sabotaging two-step of refusing aid one moment, then indirectly exploiting and benefiting from it the next, through deflection and omission. This grants the poor me the illusion of rustic self-sufficiency while avoiding any personal accountability. By never having to voice their needs or extend the basic human reciprocity of "yes, please," the poor me retains the upper hand and denies their partner any opportunity to show kindness. It's a self-infantilizing control tactic meant to keep constant assessment of their shortcomings at bay. Yet this covert deprivation through refusal is really deprivation rebounded onto their loved one. As the caring partner has their earnest gestures to assist repeatedly dismissed, only to be one-sided about it later, when poor me helps themselves to the output of those very offers they claim to not need. It breeds an inevitably arid, alienating dynamic where the giving partner feels minimized at every turn. No good deed goes unpunished by the poor me's endless double binds about receiving in a mutually vulnerable way, leaving only crumbs of gratitude as sustenance for efforts that could have easily been celebrated. By never allowing space for their partner to give to them, the poor me retains the self-infantilizing posture of perpetual provider and caregiver, holding all the power. Their wounded psyche cannot risk the perceived weakness of interdependence that could leave them exposed or beholden. This tragic theme of starving themselves and their relationships of true reciprocity is sadly just one of the myriad dysfunctional patterns the poor me cycles endlessly repeats. From always feeling persecuted to gaslighting reality to fearing true closeness, their insecurity scripts play out in astoundingly cruel yet predictable ways. So where does this intricate web of emotional archaeology and gnarled coping mechanisms even begin to unravel? How can the poor me's profoundly disordered thinking and relating habits be gradually rewired towards more secure and healthy dynamics? In our next video, we'll explore potential pathways out of the poor me labyrinth, strategies for developing self-awareness, increasing distress tolerance, and slowly replacing the exhausted psychological defenses with more nourishing frameworks of being. Because at their core, the poor me is not a lost cause. They are human beings worthy of love and belonging, just tragically dysregulated by years of unmet needs and attachment insecurities. With professional help, social support, and a willingness to do the terrifying work of feeling, the prison of poor me can be redesigned into a sanctuary of self-compassion. The road is arduous, but the freedom that comes from breaking life-limiting cycles is the ultimate reward. So be sure to join me next time as we map out these first healing steps beyond the injured ego's unrelenting burnout. There are always exits from the emotional purgatory. You just have to muster the courage to walk through the fire towards them.